Hello, here we are at COP28 in Dubai with Mr. Barnes, who's from Canada at Cape, working on the nexus between climate change, health, environment. Tell us what you're doing in Dubai and how it's going.
Well, we are here, CAPE is here with two physician leaders. We've got Dr. Courtney Howard, who's based in Yellowknife, Dr. Joe Vipond, who's based in Calgary, and myself, trying to coordinate, trying to help, basically being present in a number of areas, mostly engaging with the federal government, because as we can see, Canada is here at COP28, following the negotiations a little bit, hosting a number of events as well.
Fantastic. And the issue of health and environment and the issue of health and climate, not always directly front and center of negotiations, but this is a very important issue. Tell us about how health is being prioritized in the discussions here at COP.
Yeah, over time, the conversation changes a lot at COP. And the other night, I heard John Kerry talk about how, in the Paris Agreement in 2015, during that time, there was no conversation about methane, and yet just a few nights ago, we heard this massive announcement on methane pledges. Similarly with health, it's a concept that we're seeing increasing attention to. This year's COP had the first ever health day, and there was tons of media interest. We're seeing groups from around the world trying to embed health in some of the key aspects of the negotiations. And CAPE is actually part of a broader coalition of groups, the Global Climate and Health Alliance, that are working really hard to kind of embed that language in key spots. We're bringing it up when we talk to the Canadian delegation when it comes to federal policies on climate. We're always trying to talk about climate and health at the same time.
Right, and tell us a little bit about how air emissions or greenhouse gases affect human health, because that certainly is an important part of the discussion.
Yeah, when we think about climate change, often it has very serious long-term impacts on health. Anyone who's following the climate conversation will know, the kind of list, right? Everything from zoonotic disease spread to water shortages to flooding to, all sorts of catastrophes with extreme weather. So that's kind of a long-term issue that's health-related and very important. In the short term, often a lot of the health issues boil down to problems with, water pollution or air quality. And some of the files that we're following, methane, the oil and gas emissions cap, really often the most proximate health effect is around air quality and air pollution. So by tackling things like greenhouse gas emissions, you can simultaneously tackle the air quality effects. CAPE was very active in the phase out of coal, which in Ontario was the largest greenhouse gas reduction emission in North American history, at least at that time. I might be, right. Maybe there's an update on the record there. But really the argument was one that was primarily health focused. The idea being that, shutting down these coal plants was good for human health. There was a massive climate benefit as well, but that near-term health impact really, motivates folks who sometimes don't see themselves in that more abstract, maybe invisible long-term climate conversation.
Yeah, I think we saw during COVID how when we shut down industry, when we shut down transit, when we shut down the airplanes, the skies cleared up, right? Yeah. The air got cleaner. How about methane though? Methane is a gas that we haven't focused on in the past as much as we are now. Can we see methane when it's emitted in the various places that it's an important issue?
Yeah, well, the short answer is no, unless you have some really sophisticated camera equipment. So one of the problems with methane in Canada and around the world is so-called underreporting, right? The idea being that, often jurisdictions are counting all the places where they think methane would be leaking and then coming back with a total that says this is what we think our methane emissions are. But then when you use a kind of a satellite and actually, check to see the emissions from the air, you end up seeing many more emissions than are often reported. And so what we need to do as a country and as a globe is really kind of tighten up that piece. In Canada, we're talking about the need for something called a center of excellence, which would really be, to a large extent, a data processing and analytics center that would basically look at a lot of these emissions and then help jurisdictions that produce methane as part of oil and gas operations understand where their methane leaks are coming from and how to tackle them, because you can only really tackle the problem when you know where it's coming from when these leaks are happening, and methane is one of those very leaky greenhouse gases.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your views, for the work that you're doing. Perhaps as a closing thought, what are your feelings here at COP? Where do you think we're going with this discussion? Do you feel we're making progress in really addressing the most important health issues that are affected by climate?
Yeah, this COP28 kicked off with two pieces of good news. One, they agreed on the agenda fairly quickly, which, as I understand in COP land, that is a fairly rare thing to kind of agree to the agenda on day one. But perhaps more substantively and interestingly, there was an agreement on this loss and damage fund. And so this is really, a fund for the hardest hit areas, places on the front lines of climate change. So that's a really promising start. Often in the middle of these COPs, it's a little unclear where things are going to land. I'm hearing, they put the text in, they took the text out, they're modifying things, they're throwing in commas and periods and parentheses. We're hopeful that the outcome will be good, because there is, when I think about the Canadian delegation, we've got a very experienced environment minister who's highly motivated to make a difference. So really urging them to work on the health angle, but also do as much as possible for climate action in general.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, and have a good remainder of the COP.
Thank you so much. Pleasure.